G'day guys, I've just returned from the Victorian Team Championships where I won 4 games and 1 loss with the World Eaters running the Berserker Warband. So today we're going to break down the list that I ran in detail, we're going to break down each one of my opponent's lists in detail, and we're also going to do a breakdown overview talking about where I deployed my units, where my opponent deployed theirs, what tactics and strategies we used to achieve those scores, and a breakdown of the scores themselves to give you the best understanding of how to replicate these results when you're playing the World Eaters at your next event. So with all of that being said, let's get stuck into the video.
Look for the Blood God.
G'day guys, I wanted to thank the team from the Army Painter for sponsoring this channel and this video. The Army Painter are donating a Warpaints Fanatic Flexible Triad set for every tournament game that I win, and all you have to do to go in the running to win a set yourself is comment below with which colour you would like to win if your name was randomly selected. The Army Painter are then going to go through the comments section and select people at random and send out sets of these absolutely fantastic paints. If you'd like to browse their range, there are links in the description below for where you can look at all of the amazing paints that these guys have available, pick which ones you would like to receive if you were lucky enough, and then comment that below. That's all you got to do, nice and simple. Now let's get back into the video. Alright, let's start with an overview of the event itself. Now this was a 5-round teams event where we had teams of 5 players competing against some of the best players in the state of Victoria, where I'm from. It was a really interesting event. One of the things that we did as Team Australia and Team Victoria is instead of stacking one team full of all the state representative players, we spread them out across multiple different teams as best as we could to make sure that the event itself was really interesting and we didn't have all of the top players stacked on one team just dominating the event. So it was a very interesting event in that regard, and I got to play against some of the other top players in the state, which is also makes it a much more interesting and engaging event for myself. The event was hosted by the Risky Rollers at the Manningham Hotel. It was an absolute ripper event. Everything went to plan. There was, catering for the lunch. The terrain was always set up before each round for you by the tournament organizers. Absolutely a ripper event. The Risky Rollers do a fantastic job. And as you can see from the scores to my left, I did pretty well. So I got 4 wins and a single loss. I played against World Eaters. I played against Tyranids twice. I played against Death Guard, and I played against Thousand Suns, so a decent array of different opponents. And yeah, it was a really, really exciting event. There was some really close games in there, and there was also some big blowout wins as well. So I look forward to breaking that down with you guys in detail. But before we break down each round, I think it's important to break down my list and talk about some of the decisions that I made, because it slightly deviates from the current accepted meta World Eaters list, and I want to break those down with you. So let's jump over and have a look at my list. Alrighty guys, so as I said at the start, I ran the Berserker Warband detachment. My reason for running this is that I think it benefits the most common meta units the best. It gives the most benefit to Berserkers, it gives the most benefit to 8-bound, it gives the most benefit to the Spawn, it gives the most benefit to Hellbrutes, and as a result I think it's probably just the most well-rounded detachment. I am looking to explore the Khorne Demonkin detachment because I think it has some of the most utility, but in terms of just being a well-rounded all-comers World Eaters list, I think the Berserker Warband is the way to go for that. And it also has just some of the staples of the army, where you've got like sticking objectives on death, -1 damage in melee, just creating that situation where for a team's environment, you're able to just dominate the melee matchup. You're able to do a lot of things really interesting in those regards, and then you're also able to have some utility in the shooting matchups where you can sticky the objectives when they shoot you off it, etc. So I think in terms of something that I'm familiar with, I've got a ton of reps on it, and I know exactly how to use the tools, is the Berserker Warband, which is why I went for that in this event. However, in the background, I am doing a lot of practice and a lot of exploration with the Khorne Demonkin, and that's probably what I'll take to the next tournament that I attend. So I look forward to breaking that down with you guys in more detail at a later date. But for now, let's have a look at the list that I ran at this event specifically. So I had the Demon Prince. This is the first time I ran the Demon Prince. I gave him the Berserker's Glaive. Immediately after submitting my list, I thought, damn it, I should have given him the Helm of Brazen Ire. My thoughts were that the Berserker's Glaive makes his sweeps much more effective because it puts them up to 2 damage. And in the Berserker Warband, he gets that additional strength, so his sweeps just absolutely cleave through things. However, in retrospect, I realized that my role was basically to be put up, take a heavy table, and then fight combat armies. Because the shooting armies can't take you on a heavy table because you just hide from them all game. And especially knowing that I can sticky objectives on death, even if they do get angles on me, I'm going to control those objectives anyway. So the idea was I'm going to put up, take a heavy table, and then they're going to attack me with things that do their damage in melee. In which case, having that neg 1 damage on the Demon Prince and being able to make it neg 2 with stratagems is absolutely devastating. Somebody throws the 3 damage model into your Demon Prince and you turn it down to damage 1, and now they don't kill your Demon Prince, and then he claps back. Was probably the way to go, but I submitted it with the Berserker's Glaive, and I'll get into it when I start talking about the rounds, but it turns out this was the right choice. And the Berserker's Glaive actually came up a few times, and at no point was I sitting there going, I wish I had the Helm of Brazen Ire. You know, almost every time the Demon Prince died, he was absolutely destroyed. And the times that he went into things, there was a lot of times where he charged into things to do damage, and he only just did enough damage with the glaive, and had he not had it, it would have been a mistake. So, in retrospect, I actually think the glaive is the better choice for a Demon Prince, provided you're not already putting it on a Slaughterbound or a Master of Executions. But yeah, so the Demon Prince with the Berserker's Glaive. Then we had Khan the Betrayer. I think he's a staple. He'll be in every single list. Even if he doesn't have 10 Berserkers to roll with him, you want to run him on his own sometimes. Like, for example, in the Khorne Demonkin, where the Berserkers themselves are kind of a bit weak. They don't really do the damage. But Khan the Betrayer on his own is just an 85-point investment who will murder, like, 120-point units. And also, he gets back up on a 2-up. So he synergizes really well with the Khorne Demonkin because he can charge out, kill something. Your opponent responds killing him. Then you can summon Bloodletters off of his death. And then he gets back up, and then you get him and the Bloodletters going back into retaliate. It's pretty crazy. So Khan the Betrayer will be in every list, regardless of detachment, but especially in the Berserker Warband, he's absolutely monster. Then we had we got 10 Berserkers here that Khan leads. Now, I think they're really good in the Berserker Warband. They're also really good in Gore Track, but outside of that, I think Khorne Berserkers are a non-starter because that Strength 4 is just really uninspiring. In the Gore Track, they gain the Lance on the charge, which is really nice. And in this, they gain +2 Strength, which kind of functions as Lance, in that it's going to give you +1 to wound more often than not, and they only get it on the charge, so it's more or less just giving them Lance, except for into a very few niche targets. Like, for example, Toughness 7 models, if you go from Strength 4 to Strength 6, you're still wounding them on 5s, whereas Lance, you're always going to get that +1. So Lance is marginally better, but we also get the +1 attack, as well as the +2 strength. So it's the Berserker Warband is the hardest hitting Berserkers, but you know, closely followed by those Gore Track Onslaught ones. There's a Rhino for these lads to jump in with your standard loadout. Now, in this list, I have 2 units of Spawn and 2 units of 8-bound. Now, normally I would run 3 and 3, but what I did in this list to test out the Demon Prince is I dropped 1 unit of Spawn and 1 unit of 8-bound, and that gave me the points to fit in that Demon Prince with the enhancement. In retrospect, I think I probably would just go back to having the others, because having those additional units would have been very useful. And there were several games where I was like, I just wish I had 1 more cheap unit that I could throw out to trade before I have to commit my big units. But yeah, the Spawn, absolutely fantastic early trades. The 8-bound also make very good early trades and also provide that +1 to hit aura, which means if you need to push your Berserker's damage output to a certain threshold, like if you're versing 20 Necron Warriors, for example, the 8-bound pair really well there. But they're also very sufficient, you know, solo operatives. They can go out, the 3 of them can just go out and just kill a Rhino. You know, they can go out and kill various other things. They're very effective. They're a bit overcosted, but I think they're worth it given their duality of purpose. You know, they can be used to buff units, or they can be used to go out as missiles and attack. And anytime you have something that has dual purpose, you have to factor that in. Even if they don't achieve either of those purposes particularly well, the fact that they have two purposes means that they're a high value unit. Then we've got your obligatory triple Forge Fiend. Now, there's an argument to be made here that you drop one Forge Fiend and put in that third unit of 8-bound, because having 3 Forge Fiends is often overkill. And people have equated this to, one of the challenges is the World Eaters want to be charging things and then 6-inch piling and consolidating into things, and often the Forge Fiends are killing the targets that you want to be doing that into, which is perfectly valid. But I think the idea behind this list was to just take the good stuff and take lots of it. And the Forge Fiends are good, so just take lots of them, and you'll be surprised how easily you find ways to use them on the table because they're such a well-rounded good unit. Instead of optimizing too much for synergy, I'm optimizing for efficiency, and the Forge Fiends are an amazingly efficient unit. So that's the 3 Forge Fiends. Then we've got a unit of Goremongers here. Now, if I was to change one thing in the list, it would be to swap those Goremongers for another unit of Spawn, a third unit of Spawn. However, the Goremongers were quite interesting in a couple of games, and they allow you to prevent your opponent from getting that Infiltrate Alpha Strike on you, and they also open up the door for you to potentially get it on them. They also make secondary play a little bit easier because you can infiltrate them in a position where if you draw area denial turn 1, you can just go blop, jump out, score your area, or if you draw various secondaries, you can use this unit to achieve them, or you can use them to prevent your opponent from achieving theirs by move blocking them, etc. So Goremongers are very, very good. They don't do anywhere near as much damage, and they're much easier to kill than Spawn. However, they do have a few key advantages over the Spawn. There's 8 OC, so you can use that to early denies. They can move block much better than Spawn, so there's pros and cons to both, but if I was to change one thing, it'd probably be that. Then we round out the list with 3 helbrutes. Now, this is the spicy take in the list. Most people online don't really rate the helbrutes. I think they are dead wrong on that. I think the helbrutes are absolutely fantastic, and hopefully by the end of this video, you're going to see what I'm talking about when I talk about some of the games that I played and how I was able to get massive value out of those helbrutes. And one of the things that's worth noting, when I say massive value, I mean more than 120 points, because they're very, very cheap units. 120 points makes it pretty much the second cheapest unit in the army, with the exception of Jackals, who aren't really a unit that you use to do things with. So they're one of the cheapest units we have access to, and they are pretty much inarguably the highest damage output unit that we have. So when you combine those two things, yes, they have some significant drawbacks. They can't move through walls. They're not super fast. Yeah. Got it? But for 120 points, they are insane value. And yeah, they have an infinitely high ceiling with the multiple fights. And yes, most opponents are not going to let you get that. However, there's some things to be said about what that does to your opponents psychologically while it forces them to play around your multiple fights. And there's the fact that even if you just charge something and just kill it with 1 round of fighting and then die on the return, it's a 120 point unit. Who cares? Your 8-bound are probably doing the same thing. They're going out, they're killing 1 unit, and then they're dying in return. The Hellbrute does a very similar thing, albeit it's able to kill much bigger things than 8-bound, and it threatens to potentially go crazy and kill multiple things. So Hellbrutes are absolutely fantastic, and I'm hoping I can convince you of that by the end of this video. And then we round the list out with a unit of Jackals. Now, every list has to have 1 unit of Jackals. Sticking your home objective early in the game is super important. Having something that can fill space in your backfield to prevent your opponent from dropping behind you is super important. And the Jackals do both of those things. Being able to sticky your objective and then move off it to create that big screen and know that you don't even need to be on your objective anymore. Ideally you want to be within 3 inches of it, because being a 6-inch marker, if you're within 3 inches, they can't even deep strike on it. It's slightly closer than 3 inches because it's, the token in the middle, but being near the objective means that your opponent can't deep strike on it, but you don't have to be on it, which means if they shoot you off it, they're not getting, overwhelming force. If, there's a few things that are an advantage about not being on the objective, like Renegade Raiders don't get the extra AP, Thousand Suns Rubrics don't get their reroll wounds. There's tons of units that have those abilities that target things that are on an objective. So the Jackal's ability to hold the objective whilst not holding the objective is amazingly powerful. And then, after turn 3, when your opponent can't deep strike on you anymore, unless they have like an uppy downy, after turn 3, you can send those Jackals out and they can start heading towards other objectives. So they're a very, very good utility piece for 65 points.
I couldn't imagine running a World Eaters list without 1 unit of Jackals. Almost everything else in this list, I could imagine a world where you pivot in a different direction and you take different units. But the Jackals, you just can't. You cannot run a list without 1 unit of Jackals. It just doesn't work. So that's my list. So it's heavily themed around the Forge Fiends and the Hellbrutes, which is why I call this list Hellforged, because it's, Hellbrutes, Forge Fiends. But I think those two units synergize really well together. And I explained this in my Hellbrute Masterclass, but one of the main reasons that they synergize well together is when you have 3 Forge Fiends, your opponent has to clump behind ruins so that they don't get shot. And when they're clumping behind ruins, they're exposing themselves to the Hellbrutes by fighting things, piling into things, and creating those chains. So then they go, okay, well, I don't want to be vulnerable to those Hellbrutes, so I have to spread out, but they can't spread out because there's only limited hiding spots, and if they spread out, they're going to get blasted by Forge Fiends. So you create a really interesting problem that your opponent has to try to solve, and they have to try to solve that for the entirety of the event. For the entirety of that game, they have to be thinking about that. And that's a really, really powerful combo. So while, yes, it takes away a little bit from some of the other utility pieces that you would normally like to have, like the extra spawn and the extra 8-bound, etc., I think it's well worth it, and I think that this is an amazing combo. And now I know a lot of people talk about running the double Berserker brick. In order to do that, you would need to drop probably most of the Hellbrutes, or, a couple Hellbrutes and a Forge Fiend or something like that. And that's a perfectly valid path to head down. But from where I stand, having 1 unit of Berserkers is enough to deal with the things that require a Berserker response, and having those Forge Fiends and those Hellbrutes just opens up so many other options for you that if your opponent does make one tiny mistake, you're able to absolutely run through them in response. So, yeah, that's the list. That's the sort of idea behind it. It's relatively straightforward, and the idea with this being a teams event was that I would have some degree of table choice, table agency, and I would pick something where I know I can rapid ingress those Hellbrutes in an effective position. They can then go out next turn and charge something and mess it up. I would be able to stage the Berserkers somewhere effective and have firing lanes for my Forge Fiends. And this often led me into picking a relatively medium table. I wasn't actually going for those heavy tables that often people expect the World Eaters to go for. So it was really interesting when the opposing team would win the roll to pick tables first, and they would pick the heavy table in an attempt to deny me the heavy table. But I actually want one of these 2 medium tables would be my ideal. So that was really interesting to see the way that the World Eaters has kind of shifted in its role within a team's environment to some extent. And yeah, so with that being said, let's jump over into round 1 and talk about who I played against and what the outcome of that game was. Alrighty, here is my round 1 opponent, Ben Wadsworth. He's actually one of the supporters over on our Patreon and our Discord community, and I've helped Ben work through list ideas in the past and helped him with some coaching. So it was really interesting to get that game into him on the tabletop and see him put those things into practice. So it was really exciting. And he is a fellow World Eaters player. Now, he was running the Goretrack Onslaught, which me and him have talked about this, and it really suits his play style, the Goretrack. And he's been having a ton of success with it, with various different, tricks. It's a very tricksy army, and he's been weaponizing them very well. And as a result, we had a really, really tight, really close game. But let's have a look at it. So he had Khan the Betrayer as his warlord. He had 10 Berserkers. Then he had 10 Jackals. He had 2 units of 2 Chaos Spawn. He had 2 Predator Destructors, which are an interesting choice, but they were very, very good. Then he had triple Forge Fiend, triple Hellbrute, and then double Mauler Fiend, which was another very interesting choice, something that you don't see in World Eaters armies very often. However, because he's the Goretrack Onslaught, he actually has a lot of utility with those Mauler Fiends. So a really, really interesting list. Lots of vehicles. He had 3 Forge Fiends worth of shooting and 2 Predators worth of shooting. And then he had 3 Hellbrutes worth of combat and 2 Mauler Fiends worth of combat. So it was a really mech-heavy list, and it was really, really exciting. So let's jump over and have a look at the results from that game, and then I'll talk through some of the decisions that were made and how the sort of game unfurled. Alright, so this is the game here. So we played Lichpin and Search and Destroy, and this was the map that we played in. So basically, I deployed my Rhino in behind this ruin here, and no surprise, Ben deployed his Rhino with Khan in this ruin as well. And then I basically had one Forge Fiend in Deep Strike, 2 on the table, and 2 helbrutes in Deep Strike, 1 on the table. And by Deep Strike, I mean strategic reserves. And then Ben had, I think he had 1 helbrute in reserves and 1 Forge Fiend in reserves, but pretty much everything else on the table. And basically what happened is early game, we just were trading spawn back and forth with each other. And we were both being super cagey with Khans. Neither one of us wanted to blink first because we knew that it was going to be very difficult for either one of us to deal with the other one's Khan unit if we sacrificed ours early. If I send mine out to kill a Hellbrute off the center, then he sends his out, kills my Khan unit. Well, now he has that unit and I don't. So it was a really interesting game of sort of cat and mouse. There was a few interesting moments. One of them was there was several instances where his Predators would charge into my Forge Fiends, right? And then because my Forge Fiends have blast weapons, they can't shoot the Predator. But then the Predator just sits there in combat with the Forge Fiend and keeps shooting it. And if I fall back, I can't shoot, and then he shoots me anyway. So it was these really awkward positions where the Predators were actually doing really, really good work. But the game essentially came down to one really impactful turn. It was quite close the whole way through. I had bottom of the turn, so I knew that I had to play conservatively because I needed enough pieces left at the end of the game to jump out and get that really big score at the end. So I was playing really conservative and he was doing the same. Maybe a strategic blunder on his part. He should have been a little bit more aggressive to force the issue earlier. But there was one really interesting moment where he had a Hellbrute. Now he had some spawn here. Then behind that he had he had a Hellbrute there. Behind that was some spawn. Behind that was a Predator, and then behind that over here was a Forge Fiend. So he had this chain like that. And I basically rapid ingressed a Hellbrute over here where it couldn't be shot by anything. I then moved out, charged the Hellbrute, killed it, piled into the spawn. They fought me, failed to kill me. So I fought, killed the spawn, piled into the Predator. It fought, failed to kill me. I killed it, piled into the Forge Fiend. It failed to kill me, and then I killed it as well. So I had one Hellbrute pick up another Hellbrute, immediately earning his points back, then some spawn, then a Predator, and then a Forge Fiend. And now before people run and say, oh, well, he just misplayed by putting them all together like that, he kind of didn't have much of a choice. Because this objective down here, he had a Hellbrute on it, and I had 3 8-bound on it, and he had to get one of his objectives. So he had to put a unit on there in order to score those victory points, which was the spawn, and the spawn came up right behind. He also had to put his Predator down here, because if he kept everything back here, he wouldn't be able to draw line of sight onto that objective. So he had to bring a unit around so that he could actually use the unit. And then that Forge Fiend, similar story. If he stayed behind this wall, outside of that 7 inches of that Predator, it would have been ineffective. He wouldn't have been able to use that thing because it would have cost him an entire turn moving into a position where he could fire. So as a result, there was not much he could really do to prevent that Hellbrute from popping off. All he could really do was pray that the Hellbrute would fail to kill one of those targets, or that one of his fight on death would activate and kill the Hellbrute in return. So for example, that first Hellbrute that I charged, I killed it. If he rolled the 4 up and then killed me back, my Hellbrute would end there, and it wouldn't have been able to run through the rest of his lines and pick up all of those units. So it was the right play on him. It was just unfortunate that he didn't get that 4 up. An argument could be made that you shouldn't be hinging your game plan around a single 4 up, but sometimes you're kind of forced into a position where you have to. There was also a really interesting moment over here where we had a Predator and a Forge Fiend fighting each other, and he thought that the Predator was OC4 because the app that he was using, which was not the GW one, it was not Battlescribe, it was whatever the new one is that everyone uses, Wahapedia I think it might have been, or whatever. It had them listed as OC4, whereas when I showed him it's actually their OC3, just like a Forge Fiend. His game plan kind of fell apart because he had basically set up this play where he was going to try to equalize me or try to take that objective off me by being in combat. but that didn't work, unfortunately, for him. So that was kind of annoying for him, unfortunate. And then the other thing was there was some really interesting stuff with the fact that his helbrutes could move through walls and mine couldn't, and his Maulafines could move through walls, and I couldn't do the same. It actually created these really interesting situations where I had to try to navigate that. The one thing that's worth noting is that they can't charge through walls, and they obviously can't end their move part way through a wall. So, for example, in this area down here, when I rapid ingressed my Hellbrute, I made sure that I put it in such a way that even if he did get his charge, I was further than 1 inch from the wall, so he couldn't charge me through the wall, but he wouldn't have the space to place the Maulafine on the other side of the wall, which means he was stuck and he couldn't engage me. So there's a few moments like that that were quite impactful. But yeah, all in all, it was a fantastic game. So as you can see, we got pretty close to each other in secondaries. I got 30, he got 31, and I only got 30 for my secondaries. So quite close. We were both managing to achieve most of our secondaries with minimal interruptions. However, I was able to score more on the primary. He scored 22, I scored 32. And that was largely helped by the fact that I had the bottom of the turn, so I knew I just have to hold my resources and make sure that when whatever primary he gets, I just want to match it. And then I know that at the end of the game, I'm going to score that big 15 and or 13 in this case, and swing the game in my favor. And that's exactly what happened. So all in all, absolutely fantastic game. Ben's a lovely opponent, and yeah, it was really interesting. And I think my team got a draw that round, but I got my victory, and that's what I set out to do. So let's jump into round 2 now, and let's have a look at how that went down. Right, round 2 was into a lovely bloke named Brandon, and he was running a beautiful Tyranids army, running the Subterranean Assault, which is the new Tyranids detachment, and by golly is this detachment scary. Now, that's not going to be reflected in the score from the game, because there was a few things that swung in my favor heavily, but the sheer power that this detachment has that they're able to bring forth is absolutely insane. So let's go through his list. So he had a Broodlord, he had a Death Leaper, he had a Hive Tyrant. I'm not going to even try to understand what the enhancements do. He had a Neuro Tyrant, and then he had a Trigon. Now, the one thing I will say is that Trigon's enhancement makes it an absolute monster in melee. Absolute monster. Terrifying. Then he had a couple units of Hormagaunts, a couple units of Termagaunts. He had a unit of a single Biovore. He had a unit of Gene Stealers. He had a Haruspex, which this thing, for 125 points, is absolutely insane. I don't know why more people aren't taking them. It hits harder than a Hellbrute, and it's tougher than a Hellbrute, and it's absolutely brutal. It doesn't get to fight multiple times, but either way, most of the time you're only going to get fight once anyway, so it's a fucking amazingly valuable piece. Then he had a Lictor, he had a Morlock, he had a Pyrovores unit, he had a Tyrannifex with the big Rupture Cannon. He also had the Von Ryan's Leapers, which they have fights first and free heroic intervention, so they're a problem for World Eaters. And then he had a big unit of Zoanthropes. Now, the Zoanthropes where the Venomthrope goes. I believe it's called the Venomthrope. Wherever he is. Neurotyrant. I think it's the Neurotyrant. Either way, he goes with them and basically makes that unit into an absolute Death Star. It shoots hard. It's hard to kill. It's really, really effective. And yeah, that was his list. So the one thing to look out for when you're playing against the Subterranean Assault is they basically have this rule where a bunch of the units have a tunneler keyword. When they arrive from reserves or deep strike, you can place a tunnel marker near them, and then other units can arrive with, as long as they're not within 6 inches of enemy units. So you can take a Trigon, he comes up 9 inches away, and then you place a marker, and then the Haruspex come up 6 inches away and go for a 6-inch charge. So that was really, really effective. I think he also had a stratagem or a way to get the Tyrant to come up 6 inches away as well. I'm not 100% sure, I don't recall. But it was very difficult to play around, you know, especially with World Eaters, you've got very limited units. It's very hard to screen out those 6-inch bubbles. However, luckily for me, my opponent was not super experienced, so I was able to sort of capitalize on a few mistakes that he made. So let's jump over and have a look at the scoreboard. Alright, So this is round 2. So we played Terraform with Crucible of Battle. And as you can see, it was a 99 to 38. So a massive win for me. My opponent made a few key errors that I did warn him about, but he basically doubled down on his decision. I was like, okay, sure, if you insist. He basically deployed a lot of stuff hidden behind here, and a lot of stuff in reserves. And then he had a bunch of gaunts and stuff along here. And I basically said, mate, if you deploy like that, I'm going to be able to scout move my spawn and my 8-bound, and I'm probably going to be able to charge most of that turn 1 if I go first. And he's like, yeah, no, that's okay, that's fine. And I was like, okay, cool. I basically deployed a Rhino and my Demon Prince in behind here where they couldn't be shot. And then I deployed some Forge Fiends along down this part of the deployment, and another one up here, and then a bunch of 8-bound and stuff along the line. And I went first? No, he went first. Oh, so he went first, and this was the interesting thing. So he moved a bunch of stuff that he deployed a little bit further back in closer in non-consequential ways. And by that, what I mean is that, like, if he had a unit of gaunts here, moving them up to here doesn't get him any objectives. It doesn't achieve any goals of screening or killing anything. All it does is bring them into my threat range, right? And this is especially because he went first, but he knew where I'd scouted to. And I basically scouted everything, my 8-bound and all that, up from here, up into behind this ruin here, and some 8-bound and stuff from here up into this ruin here. And then he pulled himself into my charge range. Which was a mistake on his part in that early turn, because then basically what I did is I was able to sacrifice some spawn and some 8-bound to kill all of his screening units. I was able to just go, cool, all your gaunts are gone, all your Horma gaunts are gone, even your Gene Stealer unit, which he'd put up against this wall, I was able to kill and wipe them out. And as a result, he had no small units. All he had left was big units. And then when those big units come in, I was able to respond with my big units because I had the bottom of the turn, and I was able to sort of do serious damage there. We had one of the helbrutes, and this is another example. So in the previous game, you saw an example of the helbrutes being really, really powerful with their ability to create a daisy chain and just blow everything up. In this one, his Tyrannifex was he brought it on from reserves over here somewhere. And then I rapid ingress the Hellbrute in behind here, where he couldn't be shot. And then in my turn, I moved out the Hellbrute, charged it, failed to kill it. But then he has to hit me back. He fails to kill me. And then I get to fight again, and I kill the Tyrannifex. So the Hellbrute dies in the next turn very easily. But the fact that it's able to go in and just fight twice into that tough target, think things like Land Raiders, things that are really tough and hard to kill, but don't do significant damage in melee. You're basically guaranteeing yourself 2 rounds of combat into that unit. So for 120 points, even if that's all you get, you never consolidate into something else, you never get to pull off multiple kills. The fact that whatever the Hellbrute hits is very, very likely to die is just amazing value. So that was one thing that popped off that was really good. The other one was he had his Trigon and stuff over here. Interestingly, that unit of what are they called? The Zonethropes with the Neurolictor in it, or whatever it is, the Neurotyrant. The interesting thing there is that unit has a monster in it and infantry, right? And the 8-bound's aura is targeting non-monster, non-infantry, non-vehicle units, right? So even though most of that unit is infantry, you don't get your +1 to hit against it because there's a monster attached. Very interesting interaction there. But that Trigon wiped out so much stuff on this flank. I had to send Khan and his unit all the way across the board to deal with it because it was just going to run havoc on my lines. Sticky objectives was very effective. Anything that I put out into the center that he killed, I was just sticky the objective, and now it's like, cool, I now don't need to worry about the center. I can send most of my army up this flank and just deal with these 2 objective markers. And I had Khan's unit poised here the whole time, so I'm like, just tell him, if you go out onto that objective in the middle, Khan's unit's going to be able to respond and kill you. So he'd be like, oh, okay, cool, I guess I'll try and push you off of that one and leave the center, which just meant that I held the center all game long, which was really, really effective, without having to put any units in that direction. So yeah, that was that game. Really interesting. As you can see, looking at the scores, I got some really early terraforms. So that was really good. I was able to, I think it was turn 1, I was able to terraform this objective here because I had the Goremongers strung out here to prevent his Gene Stealers from coming at me. And then turn 1, I was able to basically move them back behind this wall and start a terraform with them, and then send my 8-bounded stuff out there to go do their damage. And then he's too busy fighting the 8-bound and the spawn that didn't get to kill all of the Goremongers, so they lived. That terraform goes off, and then that really helped with my primary for the rest of the game. I think I also terraformed the middle at some point, but you can see I got 50 out of 50 on my primary objective, which is really good. He only managed to get 16 out of 50, because pretty much the whole game he held his home and not much else. Most of the game I was pushing him off these middle objectives, and he failed to pull off any terraforms, so yeah, he got relatively middling scores of primary. And as you can see, he also really struggled to score those secondaries, only scoring 9 of them, whereas I got 39 out of my 40, so I nearly maxed my secondaries. One of the things that this list, the World Eaters list, does really well is things like Assassination and Bring It Down are very hard to achieve, because for the most of the game I had Khan and the Demon Prince in here with the Rhino, so all of my characters and all of my monsters, they generally don't come out until like turn 3 or 4, and when they do come out, the goal with them is to have the final say. The goal is, I come out, I hit you so hard that you can't recover, and therefore you don't have the tools to deal with my stuff, so you're not getting your Bring It Down and you're not getting your Assassinate. So he struggled drawing those early, and the way he had deploying quite conservatively, he wasn't able to get his established locus. Then in his next turn, he got Secure No Man's Land and Extend Battle Lines, but because in my first turn, I'd pushed in so hard, he was so busy dealing with all the stuff in his deployment zone, he couldn't get out onto those middle objectives, so he didn't score either of them then. Held those, scored them in the third turn, but now it means it's turn 3 and he's only just started scoring his secondaries. Whereas me, I got like no prisoners in the first turn, and I was like, yep, cool, I'm going out and I'm killing all your gaunts. I'm killing like multiple units there. That's an easy one. Engage on all fronts, because I'm charging into each corner, I'm able to get big scores there. So he basically facilitated a game where I was able to play the aggressive game that I wanted, but he wasn't getting any benefits from me playing an aggressive game. Normally what you want to do is you want to set up traps, so if your opponent plays aggressive, they're falling into your trap. They're falling into a position where now you can counter. But because so much of his stuff was in reserves, he didn't get to have a strong counter to me in that first turn. I was able to sort of just send and not have to worry too much about it. And then when he did start sending stuff in, he didn't have screens. So when I brought on my Forge Fiend and my Helbrutes, I was able to get those rapid ingress charges on the Helbrutes. The Forge Fiend was able to come on and get angles and shoot the things it wanted to shoot. Absolutely devastating game. But Brandon was an absolutely lovely bloke and had a lot of fun. All right, let's jump into round 3. All right, round 3 was into Peter and his Death Guard. Really interesting list. Death Guard are one of the big, bad, scary boogeymen in the meta right now, and it was really, really tight game, really interesting. So he had a Biogulus Purifier. He had a Beast of Nurgle, Demon Prince of Nurgle, who has a 5-up Feel No Pain, and this guy is very difficult to kill. Then he had a Lord of Contagion, a Lord of Virulence, a Malignant Plague Caster. He had Mortarion, who was massively impactful in this game. He had a Tallyman, who generating in the command points. He had a unit of 10 Plague Marines in a Rhino, who had one of the characters attached to it. Then he also had 2 units of Death Shroud Terminators, which are just an amazing data sheet. Then he had 3 Bloat Drones, and then 3 units of Poxwalkers, which were really effective at scoring him his various secondaries. So a really, really cool list. He's playing the Virulent Victorium. I have no idea what that is, but I think that was his detachment. It was a very, very solid list. He the Death Guard. Almost every data sheet in that book is fantastic. It's almost impossible to write a bad Death Guard list. Like, you can literally just random number generator, pick a detachment, and then pick your units randomly, and that list would probably be pretty good. Maybe a little bit hyperbolic there, but my point is that, every one of these units is so super efficient that it's hard for it to be considered a bad list. even if it's not the exact same as what the top dogs within the detachment or within the faction are playing. You know, even deviations from the meta are still very, very good, which not every faction can claim that. A lot of factions, there's like the one list that's really, really good and every other list is bad. That's not the same with Death Guard. I think Death Guard, they've got lots and lots of options and lots of range that they can do. Really interesting stuff with their detachment. Let's jump over and have a look at the scores now. So here's the map that we played. So we played Purge the Foe and Crucible of Battle. And as you can see, the score we got was a 90 to 82. So it was a relatively close game. As you can see, we both got 40 out of 50 on our primary. So it was really tight in that regard. But I got ahead where I had 40 secondaries, whereas he only had the 26. It was quite an interesting game. So I played super cagey, super conservatively. I didn't want to give up too many units too early. And I know that basically he had both of his units of Terminators in Deep Strike. So I knew that what I needed to do was play the game slowly until those guys arrive and then hit him hard. If I hit him hard early, he's going to respond by deep striking those Terminators and wiping out whatever I used. So I need to hold my pieces as best I can until after he's dropped, and then I send in. And I also needed to make sure that I was reserving my CP so that on that turn 3, when he drops in his units and then I go after him, I have the CP for neg 1 damage, I have the CP for interrupts, I have the CP for +1 AP. I need all of that sort of stuff. And this is where the Demon Prince actually came really handy, because that discount on stratagems was very, very useful. There was one really pivotal moment, which was he had Mortarion sort of central. He was hiding from the Forge Fiends. The Forge Fiends were hiding from Mortarion, sort of playing a bit of cat and mouse. But there was one point where I'd sent some stuff over onto this objective. I'm in the red deployment zone, so I'd sent some stuff over onto this objective. He's sent some bloat drones and stuff to respond. And I've brought my Forge Fiends around. I've shot at Morty, done no damage. Then he's sent Morty up to project that aura of reactive moves and whatnot. And I decided this is my go turn to kill Mortarion. So I sent Khan and his unit out. I sent the Demon Prince out. And I basically threw a grenade and threw everything I could into Mortarion. So I think it was 2 Forge Fiends worth of shooting, a grenade, all of the pistols and stuff from Khan's unit, the heavy bolter thing from the Demon Prince, everything into that Demon Prince, into Mortarion, who was up here somewhere. And I did the best I could, did almost no damage. And then I went, okay, now I need to charge the guy. And when I've charged, I've fought with just Khan himself, just Khan, and killed Mortarion. And I was like, holy crap, Khan just killed Mortarion from almost full health to dead. But then I didn't realize that Mortarion fights on death on a 2-up. And then when he fought on death, he just wiped out Khan's whole unit. And that was one of the pivotal moments that stopped this game from being a big blowout in my favor. But other than that, it was a very, very close, very cagey game. So really, really interesting and really exciting. Alrighty guys, let's jump into round 4. Now my opponent in this one was a good friend of mine, fellow Team Victoria person, is Dylan Cowan, and he was running the Tyranids, which is an absolutely fantastic list. Very similar to the previous opponent that I absolutely ran through. So when the pairing came up, I was like, yep, I'm happy to take Dylan. He's a good mate, and I know his list. However, there were some interesting differences in his list that really came to fruition in this game, and he also piloted it masterfully, which had some very interesting implications. So we'll go through those as well when we go through the summary of the game. But let's have a look at his list. So he had a Death Leaper, he had a Hive Tyrant, he had a Neuro Tyrant, and he had a Trigon. He had 1 unit of Gargoyles, 2 units of Hormagaunts, a Biovore, a unit of Gene Stealers, a unit of Raveners, which was really interesting, a unit of Tyranid Warriors, which was also quite interesting, and then he had the Zoanthropes, an Exocrine, 2 Horospexes, a Psychophage, and a Trigon. So lots of big monsters, a couple of Horospexes, a Trigon, and there was a Trigon Prime. So, multiple big guys there. The Psychophage, the Exocrine, a lot of big stuff, but then he also had this Warrior Brick and a Ravener Brick. Now, the Raveners have uppy downy for free, and they're also tunnelers. So they can basically, every turn, they can generate a tunnel, and then there's a stratagem they can use to basically move a unit that's near one tunnel and have it pop out of another. So he was basically had this game plan where he's basically going to create tunnels all over the board, and then I would basically have like Schrodinger's monster, where it's like his monster's in his backfield somewhere, but it could pop up over here or over here or over here, and I have no way of sort of predicting that. So that was the sort of idea that he had with his list. And then there's a few bits and pieces in there that were really, really effective damage dealers and were quite problematic for me. But let's jump over and have a look at the deployment and how the game unfolds. All right, so here we have the deployment and the scores. So as you can see, we've got a 40-47. Very, very tight game. You'll notice when you're looking at the scores that Dylan actually got a 57. However, he actually got a 10-point battle penalty applied to him for getting a rule wrong in the game, which is, fair enough. It happens to all of us, but sometimes when it does happen, it's quite impactful. And so we basically, at Dylan's request, we went and spoke to the TO, and the TO decided that the best way to resolve it was to apply a 10-point battle penalty, which I think is relatively fair. So as you can see, Dylan got 20 of his primary, whereas I got very few primary. I only got 5 and 3 from a challenger card, so I got absolutely dumpstered on primary. However, in secondaries, we both went more or less the same. So it all came down to that primary score. Now, this was Hammer and Anvil and Hidden Supplies, so the objectives weren't actually like this. This objective here disappeared, and one was placed, I think it was placed there, off to the side, and then one was placed up here. So, because that's what Hidden Supplies separates the objectives. Now, I basically deployed Hellbrute and a Forge Fiend over here, another Forge Fiend over here, 2 Hellbrutes in Deep Strike, and a Forge Fiend in Deep Strike, Jackals along the back, and basically the idea was that I needed to keep Forge Fiends on the board and Jackals on the board to stop him from creating a tunnel behind me. And so I'm deploying like that. I wanted at least 1 Hellbrute on the board so that if he does send full send on an early turn, I have a response lined up. And then I basically had almost spawn an 8-bound in a nook here, ready to scout up into this, and the Rhino with the Berserkers and the Doom Prince in behind here, ready to go up into this corner here. And basically, I was going to try and make a play to hold my home, this objective here, and the one that had been moved to here. I was like, if I can hold those 3 objectives for the majority of the game, he holds those 3 for the majority of the game, I can keep this game pretty close, and then, depending on who goes first or second, we then make the decision to go, do I want to try to flip his objectives, or do I want to just hold mine? There was a few impactful moments. One of them was he shot and fired a spore mine that landed right here, and that actually just ruined a whole ton of my game plans. There were several instances in this game where, because Dylan's a good mate, I had the Rhino with the Berserkers inside, and he kept finishing a move within 9 inches, even though at the start of the game I warned him, if you do that I can reactively disembark. And he kept asking to take those moves back, which I was more than happy to let him do. He let me have the occasional take back as well. We're having a very gentlemanly game of 40k. But had I not given him even just one of them, it could have been massively impactful. For example, when he moves that spore mine in, if I'm like, cool, you moved a spore mine near me, so I'm going to reactively disembark onto that objective with 1 billion OC. Now I'm going to get that primary, and then in my turn, I'm just going to jump back in the transport. And you can't do anything to those Berserkers, but I just scored primary with them. There's a few tricks like that I could have deployed that I chose not to because playing gentlemanly 40k. And like I said, I'm not saying that this was a one-way street. He definitely let me have some takebacks as well, but that was really impactful sort of stuff there. And then there was also some impactful stuff like we had one of the main things that stopped this from being a massive blowout in his favor was there was one turn where he brought up his Trigon, created a tunnel, brought the rest of his army in via either from reserves or by teleporting from one tunnel to the other, and he basically had his whole army emerge here in this area of the board. And at that stage I had a Forge Fiend back here, I had a Hellbrute back here, I had Jackals along here, and then I had another Forge Fiend over here, and he's basically got a big brick there. And what he's done is he's charged with one of his units, I think it was a Hive Tyrant, into my Hellbrute. And then what I've done is I've heroically intervened with the Jackals that was strung out along here in such a way that the first Jackal that moves base contacts the Hive Tyrant. This next one base contacts as well. And now the rest of them with that heroic intervention can't make base contact. So they're free to move in any direction, provided they end closer to the hive tyrant. So I basically moved them to bridge this gap between these two walls with that heroic intervention, which then meant that the other stuff that he'd lined up here to charge that Forge Fiend wasn't able to charge the Forge Fiend, even though they were within 6 inches of it. Because I was able to use that heroic intervention to get in the way, he had the Horospecs now had to charge those Jackals, you know, the Psychophage and the Trigon and all this other stuff that he'd planned to charge was basically blocked from charging their intended targets. So that was an interesting use of a heroic intervention where I was using it to intervene not on the combat that I was intervening into, but I was using the movement from the heroic intervention to block his remaining movement. There was an interesting situation there, which wasn't a problem at all, because like I said, we're mates, we're playing Gentlemanly 40k. But he went, I'm going to charge in here, and he rolled the charge. And then whilst I was thinking about how did I want to do this heroic intervention, was it something I wanted to do, blah, blah, he basically goes, and now I'm charging this other one. And he went to roll the dice, and as he was rolling the dice, I was like, wait, and the dice have left his hand, and he rolled his charge. And I'm like, I said wait before those dice had finished rolling. I hadn't finished making my decision yet, and I would actually like to heroically intervene. So technically, I couldn't do it because he's made another charge. He should be able to complete that charge, but I got in just in time to sort of stop him. So it was an interesting situation either way. But doing so basically allowed me to block that charge. And then this was where we had the rules challenge, where he basically used his Hive Tyrant as AP3. He told me it was AP3 when it's actually AP2. And that created a situation where I was deciding whether or not to use the the 2 CP neg 1 damage on the Hellbrute. And I decided not to because I was going to die anyway. But perhaps in hindsight, I should have used it, because if that Hellbrute survived, it would get to fight back, and then it could have potentially taken out a unit and survived itself, and then he would have had to use a second unit to fight the Hellbrute instead of... Because what ended up happening is he killed the Hellbrute, then the Hive Tyrant was able to pile into and fight and killed a Forge Fiend that, had the Hellbrute survived, it wouldn't have... The Hive Tyrant would have had to fight the Helbrute. So it was a little bit of a confusing situation. There was a lot of things happening at once, and as you can see, we actually didn't get our 5th battle round, and that's because we were using a chess clock, so it's nobody's fault. But because this situation was so complex and there were so many moving parts happening, it took both of us a lot more time than you would normally want to resolve it properly. And also because he had so many like uppy downies and teleporting and deep striking and all this sort of stuff, I had to spend a lot of my time making sure that I was screening him out properly. And then he spent a lot of time making sure that he was continuing to levy that threat against me. And as a result, we didn't get our 5th battle round. I think because I had bottom of the turn, the 5th battle round would have been to my advantage, because I would have been able to go jump on objectives. But he had killed a lot of my stuff. One of the other challenging moments that we had is I had some 8-bound in the middle here, which I thought I had positioned further than 1 inch from a wall, and he basically brought up a 6-inch deep strike with his Haruspecs and charged them, and I was like, oh, they're actually further than an inch from the wall. But then we checked it, and technically they weren't, and I forgot to declare that clearly in my turn, which is a lesson that I'm happy to learn, is that, you know, if your intent is to be further than 1 inch from a wall, so monsters and vehicles can't charge you, make sure you are crystal clear with that when you communicate it to your opponent. There's always the probability that models are going to get bumped or knocked, or, you know, train's going to get knocked. That always happens, so it's really important to be clear about that, and I failed to do so. And as a result, that Haruspex was able to charge my 8-bound and kill them, when in reality they should have been safe where they were, but that's 100% on me. There was also a moment where my Demon Prince was able to come down here and shot some Gaunts, and then made a charge into his Raveners and killed them in, I think, turn 2, maybe turn 3. Which was really important, because he was planning to use those to uppy downy, consistently creating those tunnels. So being able to remove them from the game early was quite good. But overall, it was an absolutely fantastic game. Dylan and I always have fantastic games, and it was very, very high level. Like, we were both... It was the, you know, battle of the minds to try to make this work. The Hellbrutes I would probably say they underperformed in this game. What did I have? I had one of them was back here. He died. Another one of them had to run around this way and deal with some gaunts and then 6-inch consolidate onto this objective, but he then died in the next turn. But I had to do that in order to prevent him from getting the primary and getting some future secondaries. The MVPs of this game were definitely the spawn. The units of spawn did absolutely fantastic work. They both died relatively early, but they took a lot of damage and they took a lot of things out with them. There was one point where basically he had, during his deployment, he had the Lictor, who has fights first, and something else. I think it was a bunch of gaunts in this ruin here. And I just charged some spawn into that, and the spawn picked up both of them pretty easily. And then in his next turn, he threw the warriors into those couple spawn and 8-bound that were in the middle there, and he failed to kill the spawn, which was really interesting because I was then able to, in my next turn, able to fall back that spawn over here and create a bubble that prevented him from dropping that, those tunneling units where he wanted to. So the spawn were MVPs. They're way more durable than you would expect from something that's so cheap, so fast, and so, deadly. They were really, really good. But yeah, so all in all, a 40-47. So this was my one loss from the event, and it was into probably the best player that I versed, and he's a good friend of mine. We play games most weeks, so he's, definitely one of those people where losing to them isn't something that you beat yourself up about. It's, you lose to him and you're like, yeah, well, he's very good. Fair enough. And he played it perfectly well, so yeah, that was round 4. Let's jump over into round 5. Alright, so round 5 was into Lachlan Booth running his Thousand Suns. Now, this was my first game against Thousand Suns with the new book, and oh my god, are they deadly. So his list was pretty straightforward. It was running the Covens, I believe. Grand Coven detachment, yep. He had Magnus, he had the Infernal Master, he had a Sorcerer, and then he had another Sorcerer. Then he had 3 units of 5 rubrics. The sorcerers and the whatever he's called, the Infernal Master, go in those units. He had a unit of 3 Zangor Enlightened, the combat ones, and then he had 3 units of 6 Zangor Enlightened with the guns, the bows. And then he had 3 Mutaliths, a Forge Fiend, which was quite interesting, and a Chaos Rhino. So a pretty straightforward Thousand Suns list. It's Magnus, 3 units of rubrics with characters, 3 Mutaliths, a Forge Fiend, and 3 of those Goat units with a few bits and bobs for objective play. Really, really cool list. And it's one of those things where you look at these units and you're just so confused at how, the Zangor Enlightened are only 80 points. It's that unit is as good as a unit of 8-bound that I pay 150 points for. Those units are fantastic. They're not very tough, but they are fast and they hit hard, and they've got a lot of cool utility tricks. Then you've got the Vortex Beasts. They're only 160 points, and they are so tough. They are so hard to kill. Yeah, really, really cool list. Lachlan Booth is a fantastic player. He's came 4th at our Australia's largest event, Uprising. So he's a very competent player, very talented player with a really, really cool list. Let's jump over and have a look at the scores to see how the game went down. All right, so here we have round 5. So we played Linchpin, we played Tipping Point, and this is the final round for the event, so it's, they generally save the most vanilla, most standard mission for the end, and I think Linchpin Tipping Point is probably that. And as you can see, it was a 64-60 my way, so a very tight game, very, very close. Lachlan went first, so he got 27 for his primary with 1 point from a challenger card, whereas I got 27 from my primary with no challenger card, so we've got the same primary as each other. I just pipped him by a few points on our secondaries, so getting the 27 to his 22. So, very, very close game. And the scores were close pretty much the entire time. If you look here, it's I got a 2-point lead in the first turn, but then we both got 8 and 4 in the second turn. We both got 8 and 3, essentially, because I got a 3, a 5, and a 3, whereas he got an 8 and a 4. An 8 and a 3 in the next turn. So, every turn we were pretty much neck and neck the whole way. However, I was running out of stuff, whereas he wasn't. He kept a lot of his stuff. And as a result, I was sweating, because normally when you have the bottom of the turn, you want to make sure you have plenty of stuff left alive at the end to jump out onto those objectives to score a big primary at the end. But he was very good at taxing my units, and he was making it very hard for me. I'm going to go ahead and say that of all the games I've played recently, this was the one where the dice were in my favor more than anything else. Basically, I deployed a couple of Forge Fiends here, one in reserve, so he's down here, I'm up here. A couple of Forge Fiends here behind the ruin where Magnus couldn't shoot them. Rhino in here, Demon Prince Helbrute in here, and a couple of Helbrutes in reserves. Then over here, I had some Spawn and some 8-bound. Over here, I had more Spawn and 8-bound. And then up in here, I infiltrated my Goremongers. He got the first turn. He got... I've got it here, actually. He got Area Denial in the first turn. So he sent one of his Mutalith Beasts, advanced it out to get within the center. And then in my first turn, I got Area Denial and Established Locus. It's like, okay, so I need to send 2 units out to go and do this thing. So I sent the Goremongers out. They were able to establish Locus. And then I sent a unit of Spawn out to get within range of the center for Area Denial. However, in order to get the Area Denial, I had to kill that Vortex Beast. And because of the movement on the Spawn and where I'd positioned them, in order to get within 3 inches of the center, I actually needed to charge that beast. So I couldn't just pull my Forge Fiends out and shoot it dead, because then I don't get the charge and I don't get my Area Denial. But if I don't shoot it and seriously hurt it, the Spawn are going to charge it, they're going to fail to kill it, and he's just going to kill me on the backswing. So it was actually like a very, very hard thing to do. So what I did is I decided I'm going to bring my 2 Forge Fiends around here so that they can see it. I'm going to shoot one, see what damage it does, and then decide if I shoot the second one. Maybe I don't shoot all 3 of its guns at it. Maybe I shoot one of the guns at something else. We'll see how we go with the first one. First one unloads his entire volley and does no damage. And I'm like, oh my god, this is not what I want. I think he did like maybe 3 wounds or something like that. Then the second one fires and I roll super hot for the number of shots. I roll 3 5s for the number of shots. So I'm like, okay, so that's, 3 shots per gun, plus 1 from rapid fire from each gun. So that's, this many shots, re-rolling my hits. And I'm rolling so good that I'm like, this is actually now the reverse problem. I'm worried I'm going to overkill the thing. I ended up doing a ton of wounds to it, but then he rolls his Feel No Pains, and he survived that volley of shooting with a single wound remaining, which is exactly what I wanted, because now those Spawn could charge in, and all they have to do is 1 wound, and that Mutalith is dead, and that gets me my Area Denial. So I'm like, yep, it's all perfect. This is all coming up exactly how I want it. Then I make my charge, I roll my random number of attacks, and I roll Snake Eyes. So it's like, oh no, the Spawn are going to fail to kill him now. But luckily in the Berserker Warband, they go in with D6 plus 5 attacks. So I'm like, okay, going in with 6 attacks each, roll my hit rolls, I roll like 3 hits. I'm like, oh, it's game over. This is like, not game over, but this plan has failed. But then he fails his saves, fails his Feel No Pains, and dies. And as a result, I was able to score that first turn. So that was an example of just the dice working heavily in my favor. I had to get that Mutalith down to a single wound remaining. That's a very hard thing to intentionally do, but I got lucky and managed to pull it off. And then the Spawn had to do 1 wound, and they did that, and they killed it. So that was really, really good, and got me a really strong start. Other things that were really... So basically, that at this point, I've got the 2 Forge Fiends have poked their nose around here so that they can see. He then moves one of his bow goat units out to shoot me, and I overwatched and wiped the whole unit. So it's like, okay, now that's also very lucky. Like, he's finished the move within 18 inches, so I'm re-rolling my hits and stuff, but you still don't expect to kill all 6 of those guys, but it did. So that was good. Then he sends Magnus over. Magnus shoots one of the Forge Fiends, and he gets it down to a single wound remaining. He doesn't quite kill it, which then meant in my next turn, that Forge Fiend was able to move out, shoot another unit of the guys, kill that, and then still be alive. So it's still an Overwatch threat in the next turn. So it was absolutely crazy, the amount of value that I got out of the Forge Fiends in this game. Then basically in one of the early turns, I put my 8-bound and my Spawn up on this objective. He had a unit of Rubrics. I think this was turn 2, maybe turn 3. His rubrics disembarked out, then double moved, and then shot the spawn and the rubrics that were in here, did a whole ton of damage. I rapid ingressed the Hellbrute, they nearly killed that, and then they killed it in Overwatch. So he fired like his good shots into the Hellbrute, the rest of them into the 8-bound and the spawn. He heavily hurt that Hellbrute, and then when I went to move the Hellbrute, he was able to Overwatch the Hellbrute and killed it. Interestingly, though, that meant that because he Overwatched there to kill the Hellbrute, he wasn't able to Overwatch and kill that single wound off of that Forge Fiend, which meant that Forge Fiend got to come out and do its damage again as well. So, while the Overwatch on those Thousand Suns is absolutely brutal, they can't do it everywhere. So, being able to go, cool, you've got 2 premium candidates for an Overwatch target. You can't do both. Which one do you want? And he chose this one, which killed that Hellbrute. The other Hellbrute that deployed here basically moved out into the middle, failed to charge, and then died in the next turn, so he didn't do much either. But one of the Hellbrutes really popped off. And this is one of the things where I say that with the Helbrutes, you're not going to get amazing value on every Hellbrute every game. But if you run 3 of them, chances are one of them is going to do 3 times as good as it should, and it sort of balances out. So, like, I didn't get amazing value from this Hellbrute because he Overwatched it. I didn't get amazing value from this Hellbrute because it missed its charge. However, the one that I rapid ingressed on turn 3, rapid ingressed down here, and then it moved out, charged a Forge Fiend, killed that, then consolidated, piled into a Rhino, killed that, which got me tons of points for Bring It Down. And now I've got this Hellbrute deep in his lines. It took his home objective off of him, and it killed 2 valuable pieces. Like, that's something that only a Hellbrute can do. You know, if that was a unit of Exalted 8-bound with a Slaughterbound attached to it that dropped in behind his lines, it would probably just kill the Forge Fiend. You know, whereas the Hellbrute's able to go in and go, cool, I hit the Forge Fiend, I failed to kill it, Forge Fiend hits me back, now I respond to the Forge Fiend, I kill it, then I consolidate into the Rhino hits me, you know, etc, etc. So, even though I didn't get amazing value off of the other 2 Hellbrutes, I did get amazing value off of this one. And it's worth noting that these Hellbrutes did attract a lot of enemy fire. There was a few other things. He put 2 of his Mutaliths, so he sent one into the middle turn 1, and he put the other 2 toe in on this objective here. And I had my Goremongers here, and I was thinking to myself, okay, his Mutaliths are 4 OC each, so I'll just move my Goremongers out to take that objective from him. But then when I realized they Overwatch with 2d6 shots that are going to auto hit, he's going to kill, all he has to do is kill 1, and it prevents me from taking that objective off of him. I was like, okay, that's not going to work. And then I looked at it and I was like, the only thing that I have that can take that objective is the Khorne Berserkers. If he has 8 OC on an objective, Spawn don't do it, 8-bound don't do it, Hellbrutes don't do it, Forge Fiends don't do it. You know, the Jackals in theory could do it, but they're so far away, and the Goremongers in theory could do it, but they're so vulnerable to Overwatch that I'm like, I'm just going to let him have that objective all game long. He's going to have his home pretty much all game long. As long as I can prevent him from having the center all game long, and I can control these 2, then we should be on parity. And I was expecting to lose this game anyway. I was like, this is a bad matchup for me. So as long, because I can't really deal with Magnus effectively. So I was like, as long as I can keep it to me controlling these 2, him controlling those 2, nobody controlling the center, then we should be fine. There was one very interesting play where, I think it was turn 4, he'd lost one of his beasts, he lost a bunch of his goats. One of the spawns survived in a really ridiculous manner as well. I can't remember how that went down. It was when the 2 spawn charged that guy in the first turn and killed him off the center. He then moved some stuff, fired a bunch of shots into him, killed one of the spawn, but not the other one. And then that single solitary spawn went in, killed a unit of 6 of those goats with the bows, the Zangor Enlightened, and they were sitting here somewhere. And then he moved his Forge Fiend out, shot at it, and also shot these 2 Mutaliths here at that same 8 spawn, and failed to kill it. Got it down to 1 wound left. And then in my next turn, I was like, yep, cool, I'm going to move it. And I'm like, do you want to Overwatch it? And he's like, oh, I kind of have to. You know, he's like, he really doesn't want to, but he has to. And then he Overwatches and fails to kill it. And he was mad because this spawn should have died on the center. But instead it was able to get into his lines, kill a bunch of stuff, and then still didn't die. So the spawn massively overperformed. The Forge Fiends massively overperformed. And then we had this big fight in the middle where basically in turn 4, I think it was, he sent his Rhino out. He sent one of the Mutaliths out onto the center. So they were kind of like this. And then he disembarked the guys out, and he sent Magnus up, right? So that sort of cluster is happening in the center here. So he's got like a Mutalith holding that part of the objective. He's got a Rhino holding that part. He's got some boys wrapped around the Rhino, and then he's got Magnus behind them. And I had Khan and his Berserkers inside here. Basically what I did is I disembarked out over here, so that the guys that disembarked couldn't see me to overwatch. Then I moved up behind this crate here, so that they still couldn't see me. And then I charged into just the Rubrics, not the Rhino, not the Mutalith. And as a result, there was only a couple of them that I could base contact. So I put base contact there, and then with the rest of my unit, I had to move in closer to the Rubrics, but I was able to move around like this, right? Get a bunch of OC on the objective, and also fill all of the space that Magnus was planning to heroically intervene into. Because he was tucked in behind the Mutalith and behind the Rubrics. If he rolled high enough in his charge, he could, with the heroic intervention, he could jump over. So what I did is I basically went, cool, this Berserker is going to move to there. This one's going to move to there. This one's going to move to there, so on and so forth. And now, even if he rolls a 12 on his heroic intervention, he can't actually get all the way over. And he couldn't just go in a straight line because the Rhino and the Mutalith were like that. So there was a tiny little gap that Magnus couldn't fit through, and he couldn't get over because I'd placed all my guys on that side. So that was really interesting because he'd clearly set that up thinking, oh, if Dean tries to charge me, I'm just going to heroically intervene with Magnus, and Khan's unit can't kill Magnus, without any support. And as a result, Magnus will pick them up in his turn, and it'll be all good. But I was able to do that in such a way that I basically wiped out all of his Rubrics, put more OC than him on the center. That was the same turn that the Helbrute went in and killed the Forge Fiend and then came around and killed the Rhino. So I was like, killed a bunch of his stuff, flipped that objective, and then in his turn, he then used Magnus to kill the Berserkers. But that was okay because it was happening in his turn, not mine. And I'm okay with that. The other thing, this was the game where the glaive on that Demon Prince really outshone itself, where basically I had the Demon Prince was sort of deployed here, and he spent most of the games just there projecting the stratagem aura out, because I didn't want to send him out and have Magnus just double move over and just nuke the Demon Prince. So he sort of hanged out over here. But in that last couple of turns, when there was that Rubric squad over here that dealt with the Helbrute and the Spawn and the 8-bound, this Demon Prince came out, made a charge, and then with his sweep attacks being 2 damage and AP 1, which I then bumped to AP 2, it meant that I was able to just cleave through. Actually, I think it was AP 1, and I didn't bump it because they get a 4-up invulnerable save, because I think that was the unit with the Sorcerer. But either way, because it's 2 damage, and he gets like 16 attacks or something ridiculous with sustained and lethals, I just went and just deleted the unit. And had I taken the neg 1 damage, the neg 1 damage would have meant nothing all game because he wasn't engaged in combat. He was hiding with the safety of lone op and the safety of being behind a wall. And then the turn that he did come out, I needed that additional damage to guarantee that I'm going to wipe that unit. Because wiping that unit got me what did it get me early in the game? It was a mark for death target. They were one of my mark because he only had a few units left. So that was one of my mark for death targets, I believe. So yeah, that was a really strong tail end of the game. And then the next turn, that Demon Prince then came around here and charged and killed a Vortex Beast off the center. And again, those Vortex Beasts are really hard to kill, but being able to just go in with 4 damage on your strikes and just go, cool, each one of these that gets through is 4 damage, and I've got sustained and lethal active. I haven't mentioned the blessings much in this video, but almost every game, in almost every turn, I would have sustained hits and 6-inch pylon in Consolidate. 6-inch pylon Consolidate is fantastic on Berserkers and Helbrutes, for obvious reasons. As per my Berserker Slingshot video and my Helbrute Masterclass, you can see why that's so important. So having those active almost all game was really good. However, in this game, at the later stages, I just had sustained and lethal active. Same in the Death Guard matchup, actually. I often just went sustained and lethals. And that just means that those units of 8-bound, those units of spawn, are actually just murdering the piss out of things. So that's where we were in terms of round 5, which got me another very small marginal win, which was really, really good. And this one, had it gone one more turn, I was dead. I was absolutely dead. I pretty much completely ran out of resources, and he still had Magnus running around. There was a few instances where he did the thing with Magnus where he does the ritual, and he rolls 3d6, and if he rolls a double, he takes mortals, and he actually took quite a few mortals on himself. He actually did more damage to his Magnus than I did, because I basically couldn't charge it when it was at full health, because I knew that I'd fail to kill it, and then it would just kill me back. So he basically was hiding from Khan's unit, because Khan's unit's probably the only thing that can do it. So he was hiding from Khan's unit, but that meant that everything else in my army had to hide from him. So we played this sort of cagey back and forth hiding from each other until late in the game. And then at that point, late in the game, I realized, well, once Khan's unit's come out, dealt with its threat, he kills Khan's unit. Now I definitely can't kill with him. So I just ignored Magnus pretty much all game. And just let him run around, kill 1 or 2 things a turn. It's fine. As long as I'm scoring my secondaries, as long as I'm scoring my primary, I'm fine. And yeah, that's more or less how that game went down. So that's the final game, round 5. Alrighty guys, so I hope you enjoyed that. So some takeaways, I guess, for me are that if I was to change the list, the one thing that I was unsure about going into this was the Demon Prince. And unfortunately, I'm still unsure. He went well in some games, but other games he really underperformed. And potentially this is because I wasn't using him effectively, because whenever you're trying out a new unit, sometimes it takes a couple of events to sort of find your feet on the unit. I found his lone operative was not particularly useful in my list, because I run a lot of things like helbrutes and forge fiends. He doesn't have a lot of infantry, and like Khan's unit sitting inside a rhino most of the game, he doesn't have a lot of units to give him that lone op. And also some of the units that he has that give it to him, like the jackals and the goremongers, are so easy to kill that I didn't want to put him out with them, because people would just shoot them dead and then shoot him dead, now that he's not near infantry. And like, yes, you can put the infantry on one side of the wall, put him on the other, they can't see the infantry and then they can't shoot him. That can be done, but on these terrain layouts that I had, I was struggling to find opportunities to do that effectively. You know, almost everywhere that he could get to from my deployment, there's nowhere near there that you could put a unit of infantry and hide them effectively. So the lone op ability didn't really come up. And the way I play World Eaters, maybe this is a consequence of having played them for so long, that I'm used to doing almost nothing in my first 2 to 3 turns. So I generally have a lot of command points available to me. So even his ability to discount stratagems, it was very nice. It was a high quality of life thing. But I rarely found myself going, oh, thank God I have a Demon Prince so that I can do this stuff. You know, it just meant that I was throwing grenades that I otherwise wouldn't. You know, I was rerolling damage rolls on helbrutes that I otherwise wouldn't. You know, like when you roll a 1 for the damage on your hammer, and you're just like, yeah, I'll reroll that for free. Why not? There's a Demon Prince right there. But it's like, you don't need to do those things. So I think if I was to change the list going forward, I'd probably remove the Demon Prince and put back in the unit of Spawn and the 8-bound. Just because I think that those 2 pieces as opposed to 1 provides a lot of utility. It allows you to go, cool, I'm going to throw these units out onto those objectives early in the game so that my opponent can shoot me off of it and I sticky the objective, or they are forced to charge me off it, in which case it's bringing them in closer to my threats. Having more pieces to be able to do that, more pieces to be able to score those secondaries. When you draw cleanse, the last thing you want to do is cleanse an objective with something like a Forge Fiend that wants to be shooting things. So I think that's the direction that I'd take it, which actually brings it back in line with the list that I'd taken to previous events. So maybe that's the direction I would go. But I think I've now done plenty of testing and plenty of sort of events with the Berserker Warband, that now what I want to do is I want to pivot into looking into Khorne Demonkin for my next tournament. But yeah, so anyway, so that's where we landed. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, all that good shit. Let me know what your thoughts are on the list that I ran and the matchups that I had. And I will see you in the next one. Cheers.
The Warhammer community suffers from some of the most prohibitively expensive essentials in the world, especially Australian content creators. Every single day, Dean wants to create content, but he can't. Suffering from old, worn-out brushes, expensive model kits, and costly software and equipment he can't endure much longer. Just look at this dirty paint water. Would you drink this? Would you let your child? Even a small monthly donation can help provide Dean with clean paint water, basic tools for survival, and access to life-saving information and education. So please, follow the links in the description below and find out how you can sponsor a mad cunt like Dean today and end the suffering. Suffering that is cruel, unsustainable, and your fault.